Thank you for joining us today for the Hands-On with Design Mode in CRM. My name is Tim Lenczowski, and I'm a consultant with BrightVine Solutions. And so we have about 40 minutes that we're going to talk about design mode and some advanced configuration. Now, in that time period, we can't really get into all of the details. My main goal for this presentation is to familiarize yourself with how you could use the design mode and give you some real life business scenarios where it is helpful and time saving. Then you also have the resources at your disposal. You'll have this recording of this presentation as well as the PowerPoint. But if you do need to reference back to something, we also have the Blackbaud documentation, as well as there's an additional Blackbaud training class that will really get into the details of the design mode. But for today, I want to make sure that you're familiar with what it can actually do. So as I said, my name is Tim Lenczowski. I'm currently live in Matthews, North Carolina. And for those of you who are Harry Potter fans like myself, I'm the House of Hufflepuff. BrightVine Solutions provides consulting and services to nonprofit organizations on multiple platforms, but we do, of course, specialize in Razor's Edge and Blackbaud CRM. We have a few other presentations this week at BB Dev Days around AI and machine learning, which is a great space that we work in as well. For our agenda for today, I want to take this in just a couple of sections. I want to first talk to you really about design mode and some time-saving tips. How would you use it in your daily, weekly work in order to save some time? So we'll go over a few of those things, as well as one of the big topics, of course, is having user-defined data lists and extending existing pages or tabs, as well as adding functional areas, pages, and tasks. And I couldn't really talk about advanced configuration without giving a couple of call-outs to some other pieces of functionality that I think are very interesting and helpful. So when we're talking about advanced configuration, and that's really where the design mode or page designer fits in. I did want to talk about the holistic approach to how the system works. Is first, there are things that, let's say, a power user or someone you assign the responsibility to can actually do configurations for. There are settings in the system, there are code table values, there's smart fields that can be set up, constituent attributes or other kind of attributes. Those can all be done at the configuration side. But there's a layer here we're going to talk about today, which is more advanced configuration, which uses the design mode or page designer to extend pages, to add tabs, to do certain actions on pages. And we're going to look at that today. That's still within the tool, the application, and it enables the users who are using it to be able to make those tweaks to the application without having to go to a developer. And then, of course, the last part of that is full customization. And that's where we need our development team to help us because that's really using the SDK to customize the application and maybe some custom business processes, some coding, things like that. The development team will help us with. But we're going to focus on this middle section of advanced configuration today. Now, a lot of times you'll hear design mode, and you also hear page designer, and they're really the same thing. And we're going to talk about it today. But when I think about design mode, and you already know I'm a Harry Potter fan, so when I think about design mode, I do think about the Revealio charm. In Harry Potter, the Revealio charm was used to reveal concealed objects, messages, and invisible things. That's how I use design mode, because it'll help me to look and see how things are working today in the application, how Blackbaud set them up on the product. And then by looking at that, then I can actually make some additional areas and pretty much copy how they were doing it. So I don't have to do everything from scratch. There's somewhere in BBCRM today that has a page or a tab or an action that is doing what we want it to do that we can look at and use when we're building out something new. Okay, so this first part, I want to talk to you about these little daily, weekly time-saving tips and how you can actually use the design mode. And these are things that I do on a recurring basis, so I just wanted to call them out. But we're also using this to give us a little orientation to some of the pieces we're going to use in the next section as well. So the first thing I want to talk about is using the design mode for permissions. Today, if you're working with your security roles, you usually have to go to the admin section and go to security and go to your security roles, pick a security role, and then look from that perspective and say, now I'm going to have to assign features to it. And then I got to search through all the lists of features. Now, this is real handy when you're first setting that role up. But when you're just going to add something, I put in a new data list, or there's a new form I want to give a certain security role permission to, this might be a little more cumbersome. But design mode can really help us out there. So the first thing is I'm going to turn design mode on, and it's this little toggle over here in the right-hand corner, and it'll turn on the design mode. Now I'm going to go ahead and go to the constituent area. And I'm going to pull up a constituent real quick. And we're going to take a look. And I'm going to be using this constituent a lot today, but it can be any area of the system. But as you can see now, I do have my design mode turned on, and I have my properties in particular areas. But let's say I was on a particular data list or form, and I'm going to just start here in the interactions. And now I want to look at the security permissions from here. The design mode allows me to assign permissions to this particular form or data list or whatever I'm on. So I can click on assign permissions, and it brings up the roles. And then I can just select which role and grant or deny or change the permissions for the actual form or data list. And to me, that's a lot simpler than actually having to go find the role and then searching through all the various features in BBCRM. So that is one area that I think is really easy to use design mode for. But while we're here, let's do just a quick anatomy of a page. So I'm on a page in BBCRM, and most of our pages are pretty similar, where we have this summary information here at the top, and then I have a detailed section down here at the bottom with my tabs. Well, in design mode, you can see it follows suit. So here's the page up here at the top. This would be the properties for the entire page. But then here's the section here, which is my summary section, and here are the properties that are for my summary section. And then lastly, when I go down into one of these detailed sections, I'll have the properties for the detailed section. So each one of those, I can use the design mode to go look at particular things. One of the other things that I use it for a lot is, now I might be a little more technical. I'm on the functional side, but I do a lot of VA work, and then I hand off specs and things to my technical team. With that, I may need to give them a little more information in my spec, like what are we looking at here? Are we looking at a data list? Are we looking at a form? What is the name of that data list, or what is the name of that form? And there's sometimes that maybe even I'm just troubleshooting, creating a ticket with Blackbaud, et cetera, that I want to know that exact information. So with design mode, I can go to properties, and it's going to open up the properties. And I can see, all right, what this particular item is here's the section type. It's a data list. And then it's going to give me the data list name right here. So using design mode, I can find out those data lists and form names, and then I can take actions or do something else with them. In addition, I can explore or analyze behavior further. And I kind of alluded to this with the Revelio charm. I like to start with what Blackbaud originally had designed. And I think about, hey, if I'm adding, let's say, a new user defined data list, which we're going to do in just a moment, and I want to do a particular action. And I'm not really sure, but it's similar to this action that Blackbaud put on this interaction page right here, this ad right here. I want to know how that works. Well, I can go into my properties and I can see how things are set up today. And then when I add my new one, I can just use that behavior and repeat it on what needs to be there. So in this case, we were on our interaction. We know this is a data list, and we know our data list name. Now I can go down to the very, very bottom here, and I can see actions. And that's the actions at the top and the side, and we'll look at those in more detail in just a moment. And here's our actions that you can do on this particular page. So for actions, the first thing I just wanted to bring up is if you see them multiple times, don't panic. There's reasons for that. BBCRM gets fancy and will have different rules for displaying certain things. So in this particular case, that edit interaction, if I go and click on edit just to see what behavior it's actually doing, I'll see that it's actually a step, right? So it's a stewardship step. And so there were some rules there. It's only visible if there are stewardship steps, etc. And if I go to another one, you'll see on this particular action, it's a different type of step. So they just defined them several times and gave some visibility rules on them. And this particular one is an individual step. Now, we were talking about that add right here. So if I want to see what that actually does and how that works, I can click on edit. And it's going to show me in that action how that is set up. So I can see that this is an action. It's visible. And then if I go down here, the action type says it's going to show an add data form, and it's going to show this particular form. So now that I've kind of analyzed this behavior, if I want to duplicate it on something else I'm doing, I can do that. And we're going to do that in just a moment. Okay. As we're talking about actions, I did want to point out real quick a couple of things. One, there's actions up right here at the top when you come into an area like add, but there's also actions here on the actual record. If I click on the chevron, I can see that I can edit an interaction or edit response or delete. Those are actions as well. And in a moment, we're going to talk about why that difference is important, but I just wanted to point those out while we're talking about the anatomy of the page. All right, so one other handy thing that I think is common, at least I'm asked for it a lot, is, if I'm looking at these particular tabs, maybe some of the descriptions don't really fit, my business. Maybe I want to change some of the names. I can do that. Well, let's say here for this opportunity and asks, maybe I want that to only say opportunity. Well, I can do that in the design mode too. Now these are tabs, right? The tabs actually belong to the properties of the page, and I have an option up here to edit tabs. And if I click on that, that's going to give me the hierarchy of the tabs and the sub-tabs. Now, some of these are going to have some other code on them for visibility. This is only valid if there's an interaction, something like that. But then you can also see that some of them are the names as you would appear on the tabs. So we're going to go down to fundraiser, which is right here. And we can see that here's our opportunity and asks sub-tab. I'm going to go ahead and click on edit. The name is just right here. And if I just wanted to change that, I could just change it and then say, okay. And that name is actually then saved. All right, so I can use design mode to just do these little localizations, personalizations, make things that are closer to my business process. And I wanted that section too, just to kind of give you some of those daily things you could use it for. But there are some bigger things that we use it for. And this is where more the bang for the buck is, right? So the first thing is user-defined data lists. And I, on the functional side, get this request a lot from users, and they'll say, oh, you know what, my constituent attributes, that list is just way too long. I need to just see these category of attributes. So I could create a user-defined data list that would only display those attributes, and I could put in a sub-tab, right? So they could go to just that sub-tab to see that. I'm going to work today a little bit on the interaction side and just show you there, because I get that request a lot too. Most commonly, if you use interactions a lot, maybe you only want to see interactions for a particular college / department, or maybe a clinic, something like that. In my case, I'm going to use the example of journeys. And so if I'm working on journeys and I want my users to be able to see the journey that this person is in, maybe what step they're on, I may want to add a sub-tab here under interactions for journey, and then build these custom or the user-defined data lists. Now, this is a spoiler alert because I'm showing you this ahead of time, but I think it's going to illustrate what we're actually doing when we create these. So the first thing is I want to point out is when you're building your data list, think about where they're going to be used and how they're going to be used. So in this particular case, I'm saying, yes, I want to see the journey for this particular constituent. So I'm on the constituent record for Tim. I only want to see Tim's interactions that fall within this definition of this journey. In order to do that, I have to pass some information from the constituent record into the data list. That's called context. Context, it's I know through training it's always usually a complicated subject, but it makes more sense when I look at it this way and I think, all right, when I put this data list on here, I only want to see the items that belong to Tim, so I want to be able to pass something along, that context along. So what that usually is a system record ID, right? So I'm going to pass that system record ID as context, and my page content type is constituent because I'm on a constituent page. Now, why I say you kind of need to plan this out just a little bit is think further about how you want your users to interact with that data. So yes, I want to see just the interactions that belong to Tim. That's what's here. But now maybe on this particular interaction, I want the user to have the ability to edit. Well, if they're going to do edit, that's going to take them into the specific interaction. In that case, I'll need to pass the interaction system ID along to this form. So there is an additional context here for the section. Okay. Now, let's go in and see what this really looks like in the back. So I'm going to go create my user-defined data list. I'm going to do that under the functional area of admin, application, shell design. Now, in the effort of time, I've gone ahead and pre-configured these. We'll go here to the user-defined data list tab. And you can see here on my user-defined data list, if you're creating a new one, you can simply click add. In my case, I'm just going to go edit and show you how you create these. So here's my welcome journey user-defined data list. Look familiar? It's query, right? I'm just basing this on a query. So I'm going to define the query and I'm going to put the criteria in there. And in this case, my interaction category is going to be welcome journey. And then the fields that I put down here in the result are actually the fields that are going to display in that data list, right? So they're down here. Now I did take the opportunity to clean up the headers of those by just using my change column header because that's what's going to display on your data list, right? Here's your column header and then the data that's in there. Now, we talked a little bit about context. And we said that we know that we're going to pass the constituent system record ID down to the data list. So I need to make sure that that's in my output. In addition, I said, I'm going to let the user edit the actual interaction. So I need to make sure that that system record ID for the interaction is also in my output. Now, when I go to my set save options, I get to really define it a little bit further. So the first thing I can do is say, which of these fields are actually going to be visible to the user? So name and lookup ID is not really necessary because remember, I'm going to be on that constituent page that has the name and constituent ID at the top. So I'm just going to go ahead and hide those. And I know we need the system record IDs, but that's not really useful to the user. So they don't really need to see it. I'm just going to use it in the background. So I can make that hidden as well. And then these others are going to be visible. I want to be able to see those in my data list. Another option we have is we can offer filters to the user. So I can check a filter here and allow the user then to filter on this particular item. So in my case, it's subcategory, which will be my journey step. They may want to filter and just see all of that specific step. So I'm going to allow them to do that. Here's where that context comes into play. So we are going to pass that constituent system record ID. So I got to choose it. These are all the fields that are in my output. And then what is the record type that we're going to use in its constituent. And that's a constituent page that we're going to put this on. And then, of course, I can give the data list a name and a description. All right. So that is how I would define the data list. Now, the next part of that is I want to extend, the interactions to put that subtab. So let's go back and look how I would do that. So we talked a little bit about tabs and subtabs, and we said those were at the page level. So here's my edit tabs. So I'm going to click on that. And if I was going to add a tab, first I go to that particular section. So we're going to go down to our interactions. And here it is. And if I wanted to add a new one, I could just click add. I have my journey step already there for time. So I'll just say edit. And so I give this sub tab a name, make it visible. And then I get to say on that sub tab, what sections, what are you going to have on there? And if you remember, I had two sections. I had the welcome journey, and then I had a sustainer journey. So I can define that right here under my sections. I can just click the little ellipse, and I can add one by clicking add, or I can just edit these. So you can see I defined one as the welcome journey, one as the sustainer journey. And if I go into that, that is where I'm going to link this to the actual data list. So this is the welcome journey, and it's going to, the section type is going to be data list, and it's going to display this data list. Then, as we kind of scroll down here, we'll see I have context type. Where is it going to get that context? It's going to get it from the page, right? It's a constituent page. It's going to pass that constituent system ID to this data list and only then show these particular welcome journeys for this constituent. And then one additional step down here is I can also define then the actions on that data list. I can do this here, or I can do this in another place. And I will be honest, usually when I create my user-defined data list, I get them all displayed correctly first, and then I come back and I do the actions in a second step. But you can define them here if you knew what they were. Remember, we said we wanted to do the add, like what was on that other interaction form. That's here. And I'm going to click edit. And we just give it a name. We can give it an image. There's an image library you can choose from. Of course, we'll want to make sure that it's visible. In this particular case, on the add, remember, it showed me that I was going to do a show add data form. And I'm going to use the interaction add form, just like the one we looked at earlier. Okay? So that's what that particular action will do. Now, these are a little different because you remember these we said I'm going to do to the actual interaction record. So there's a little additional piece of context here. So these are both similar, is that I'm going to go to either the interaction or I'm going to edit, and I'm going to go to that specific interaction. So we'll just look at the go to. In the go to, I'll go ahead, of course, give it a name, make sure that it's visible. One additional thing that I did here is the link field ID. That's where my hyperlink is going to be. And we'll see that in just a minute, but BBCRM will allow you to find a field, make the hyperlink. So when you click that hyperlink, it does this action. And in my case, it's going to do show data form, and it's going to do the constituent interaction view form. Okay. Where this context is a little bit different, remember the add, we used the page context because that was coming from the page, the constituent. This one is going to use a particular section field. And this is where I feed it the system record ID of the interaction. So then it'll go right to that interaction. All right, so now let's look at this and see how it then displays on the page. All right, so under my interactions, I now have that subtab of journey. And then if you remember, we defined two sections. One was the welcome journey, and one was the sustainer journey. And then when we defined the welcome journey, we said, oh, we wanted to be able to do the add. So if I click on the add, it's going to take me to that form, but you can see it already knows it's for Tim. because it knows that constituent ID. I can't even change it in here. It just defaults that it's coming to that particular constituent. And then if you remember on the go-to, we did the hyperlink on welcome journey. So now when you click on the welcome journey, it brings up that view form of the interaction. Okay. And then of course we had the edit to, which comes in the chevron, because it's specific to this interaction as opposed to being at higher level at the constituent. Okay, I know that was a lot. Again, I just want to be able to share with you what you can do for it. And hopefully you'll just remember, hey, I remember him showing me something about that. And then you can look further in the documentation if you need some of those tips.
Hey, Tim.
Sure.
We have a question in the chat referring back maybe a few steps, but it was asking, is the change of the tab name user specific?
It is not user specific.
Okay.
In design mode, I'm doing it for the application itself. I think what that's kind of referring to is if you, in BBCRM, I as a user, if I change the order of my tabs, that is user specific. But what we're doing here in design mode would be application, so it would be all users.
Perfect, thank you.
Good question. Okay, I want to build on that a little bit. So we like the idea that we can do these user-defined data lists. I, as a a business analyst, can actually do these. And I don't have to take it to the development team. I can do these. So when a user group comes to me and says, "Hey, I'd like to see my data this way or that way," I can do this. Now, what we did right then is we extended an existing page and added a sub-tab. But what if I want to do something bigger? What if I want to create my own functional area? So I want to show you how that would work and give you a little bit more anatomy of that. Again, I'm going to do a little spoiler because I'm going to show you at the beginning, because I think that helps as I do explain how things work. So,
hey
yes,
Tim.
Sure.
Another question before you jump into that. Is it possible to move these changes from one environment to another?
It is not. In most of these, you would then do them in the other environment. Now, as I say that, you do have the configuration import and export, but it's not specific. I don't think it's specific enough to do this if you're only doing like, I'm going to change a tab or I'm going to extend this one thing. A lot of the categories in the configuration export and import are kind of all. So we just have to, depending on what change you're making out to see. For example, if it was a data list, if you're able to do the export of the data list at that data list level, yeah, you could export it and take it over. But I have a feeling it's too finite to do that. You have to just duplicate these configurations in the other environment as well, or a full refresh. Okay. So I'm going to take you to this other functional area here. I'm just clicking on because I have a lot of functional areas here. I have the little extended arrows, and you can see I have a data cleanup functional area. What I was doing here is there was an activity we were doing to do a lot of data cleanup, and I was going to create a lot of data lists that I could have users go in and look at data, go to that data and fix it. So I wanted to, this was going to be only accessible by a set of users, maybe in donor relations. So I was just going to create this other functional area and then put these data lists or places they could go to see and work with this data. So I created a new functional area called data cleanup. And then on the functional area, I created some task groups because I'm going to have multiple different types of constituent lists and multiple different types of interaction lists and constituent reports. But these are my task groups. And underneath them are tasks. And the task is actually what's going to launch and display the page. Okay. And then when I go to, let's say, the constituent data cleanup page, this page actually displays 3 tabs: names, phones, and addresses. And each one of those has data lists on them. So this one has 2 sections, which are 2 user-defined data lists. Okay, so that's our end goal. So let me real quick show you how we would do that. So first we go back to admin and applications, and under shell design, this is where we were to do our user-defined data lists, right? So these are my other data lists that I'm going to put in this functional area under one of those task groups. So they'll be created exactly the same way. But in this case, I'm going to go ahead and create another functional area. So I would go to the functional areas tab, and I could simply click on add and create one. I'm going to go down here and show you the one that I have already created. And it's real simple. It's just you give it a name, you can give it a description, you can choose an image out of the image library. I do use sequence a lot when I'm doing these or doing pages, and that's really just the order that you'll see up here. And so I chose a real high one, 50,000, just to make it at the end. So now, you know, it's only gonna be displayed by a certain set of people, and it'll just be off there at the end. And then you'll want to make sure that it's visible. And that's really it. And I do this first, is, you know, I do my data lists and I do my functional area. But now there's some pieces in the middle we gotta put together. User-defined data lists are going to be visible on a page. So I've got to create a new page if I'm doing this. So I'll click on pages. In this particular area, if I was creating a new one, I could just click on add here. No worries. I will say what's very important in this area is your naming convention. You'll want to be really consistent with your naming convention, because you can see there's already 873 pages. And when you go to find your page, you want to know what you've named it. Now, I'm going to cheat, of course, because I already know where mine is. Now, again, if you're adding a new one, you won't have to do this. But if you are looking at an existing one, you would need to do this. And I am going to go right here to page 8. And these ones that I created are these data cleanup, constituent interactions, and reports. Remember, we saw those from the page. Let me go ahead and just show you one of these and what they look like. So I give the page a name and a description. And I, of course, want to make sure that it's visible. You can give it an image from the image library. And what we're doing here is we'll define what kind of page it is, what's the record type. In my case here, it's constituent. On that page, then I can define how many tabs, or what's the tabs that are going to be on that page. So I'm going to click here. Remember, from what we looked at, we had names, phones, and addresses. Those were tabs on the page. And if I want to see then how I would set these up, is then on that tab, I would say, of course, it's visible. It's going to have 2 sections, which are my data lists, right? Now this looks similar to what we've done before, is that in my section, I can then say on this section, display this data list. It's thinking. And then select the appropriate data list. Here we go. So I'm going to give it a name. I'm going to say that it's the section type is a data list. And then I'm going to pick my data list. I can search and pick the data list I already created. In this case, I'm using the page context, okay? And I can do that with the other one as well, okay? And I can take it all the way down and do actions if I wanted to do my actions there, just like we did on the other data list. All right, now, got my user-defined data list created. I now have a page that's going to display it, but how do I display it on the functional area? I have to have one additional thing, and that's a task. And so we'll go to task. And again, with task, if I was creating a new one, I could just click add right here, create it, be done with it. In my case, I'm going to show you one. Now I went ahead and sorted this by functional area. So I'm going to go to our new functional area that I've associated it to, and it's right here. Here's my data cleanup area. Here are those 3 tasks and task groups. So I'm going to do edit, and I'll show you how this looks. So there's just a couple of things that are different here. So I'm going to create that task. I'm going to give it a name. I can give it an image. I'm going to say what functional area it belongs to. So you remember when I went in here and I created that functional area first? That's why. So then when you go to create the task, you can go ahead and tie it to that functional area. And remember, we looked and we saw that you had those task groups. That's where I would assign the task group right here. And I'm saying for this particular task, I want you to show the page. And then I pick the page that we just created here to be able to display it. Okay. And when we go back and take a look at it. Oh, one additional thing, by the way, if you're doing all of this new and you're doing it right here, you may need to click on this refresh cell navigation over in the left-hand corner, because we are making changes while we're in the database. That'll go ahead and refresh it to make sure that everything is there and available for you. All right, I'm gonna go to data cleanup, and we can see we have those task groups. Here's that task we created. And when we click on it, we have those 3 tabs we talked about are right here. And then I have my 2 sections, which are different data lists, and my actions are on there as well. Remember, just sort of like the hyperlink that we did before. All right. Any questions? Yeah.
Yeah, we do have a couple questions that came up. I didn't want to interrupt you as you were flowing there, but one of them, the first one is, how does edit context links work?
That is a really good question. I don't use that feature a lot. So that one I would have to get back to you on. We'll have to follow up on that particular one. I don't use that particular feature, but we can definitely get back to you on that one.
Let me write down some info here so we can follow up.
I love that. I'll learn something new.
Okay, and then the other question is it possible to create a data list that takes parameters in design mode?
Very interesting. So it's a good segue into my next little slide here. And this is the last slide, by the way. There are some other features that are involved in advanced configuration besides just the user-defined data list. There is also an option for user-defined smart queries. And that's your parameter query, where you can define that smart query in the same place that we were. Application, there's another tab for user-defined smart queries, where the user that you're going to expose this to, the user doesn't have to know queries, and you can do a parameter where they can put something in like this attribute category or this date range or something like that, that then will launch the query and bring back the subset of data. So that would be the area I would tell you to look at, is the user-defined smart queries, and they can be put on pages just like we did the user-defined data lists. The other honorable mention is search list configurations. Just a mention that on your search lists, BBCRM does offer that some of those can be tweaked a little bit and have additional filters or additional output fields. Not every field, but there are a good set of different fields that can be on there. For example, the constituent, if you're an international customer, you might want to put country on as an additional filter item or an additional output to see what country somebody's in. Those fields are available to actually change on those search lists. And the last one, which I totally love, I think it is an awesome feature. Attributes themselves, we can put our attributes on constituents, interactions, various places in the database. We can make those, our own fields, our extension fields. Did you know that you could also add those as form extensions to, let's say, the interaction view list or the interaction add form or the interaction edit form? There is that attribute form extensions when you're adding your attribute category, which will allow you to add those either as a separate tab or after the parent form, it would list those as well. So I wanted to give those honorable mentions because I think those are great features as well. And I know we're right at time. I know that was a lot really quick. My goal, of course, was just to make sure you're aware of these things and kind of put some real life business scenarios to them. And then as you're going through and starting to try things, hopefully you remember, oh, Tim said something about that. And you can go back to some of the resources that we've listed.